Good evening and welcome to Q News special coverage as we reflect on the defining moments of 2024. In just 3 months, Q News has quickly become a trusted source, delivering reliable coverage and sharp analysis of global and regional events. From geopolitical shifts to key Middle East developments, this year has been marked by challenges and transformations. Stay with us as we recap the major stories, analyze their impact, and offer insights into what the future may hold. Before we start our 2024 recap, we begin with today's top stories with our colleague Salma Marwan.
Thank you, Rana, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And let's start with our top stories for this hour. Former U.S. President and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Jimmy Carter has passed away at the age of 100 in Plains, Georgia. Carter served as U.S. President from 1977 to 1981 after being defeated by Ronald Reagan in 1980. He earned widespread respect for his humanitarian work and went on to live longer post-presidency than any other U.S. president. Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbed to over 45,400 and over 108,000 wounded. Medical reports said that at least 9 Palestinians were killed and dozens of others wounded in an Israeli airstrike in Al Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza Strip. Amnesty International has called on Israel to release detained health workers, including the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, without delay and unconditionally. Expressing deep concern over his fate, Amnesty urged the international community to act urgently to end what it termed Israel's genocide in Gaza. The World Health Organization has reported that Kamal Adwan Hospital is now non-functional after an Israeli raid, leaving northern Gaza without critical healthcare services. French defense and foreign ministers are visiting Lebanon to meet French UNIFIL troops. The French defense minister will meet Lebanese Army Commander General Joseph Aoun in Beirut, discussing troop deployment in southern Lebanon following the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. They will also meet the head of Lebanon's South Litani sector, overseeing the ceasefire monitoring committee. Syrian Transitional Government Foreign Minister Asad al-Shibani has announced plans to establish a strategic partnership with Ukraine across political, economic and social sectors. This announcement came during the Ukrainian Foreign Minister's visit to Damascus. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry emphasized the importance of monitoring the actions of the new Syrian government, noting that diplomatic ties had been severed due to past support for territorial violations. It also stated that Kyiv may resume relations if there is a change in policies and progress in dialogue. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that negotiations on the Ukraine crisis must address its root causes and reflect the realities on the ground. Lavrov emphasized Ukraine's non-aligned, neutral and non-nuclear status as a countermeasure to NATO's expansion. He also called for guarantees to protect the rights of Russian-speaking citizens. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has stated that current conditions are not conducive to ending the conflict in Ukraine or any of its phases. Peskov confirmed that Kyiv continues to reject negotiations with Moscow, noting that Hungarian Prime Minister's peace proposal has not altered the situation. Kyiv maintains its legal ban on negotiations and shows no willingness to change its stance, leaving the situation unchanged. Russia has claimed control of Novotroitsk, which lies near Pokrovsk in Donetsk. This comes as Ukraine reported repelling multiple Russian attacks. The Russian Defense Ministry stated that its forces targeted Kharkiv and other Ukrainian cities, destroying military equipment. Additionally, Russia's air defenses reportedly downed 61 Ukrainian drones. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned of a climate breakdown, highlighting worsening global temperatures in his New Year address. He further stated that the 10 hottest years on record took place in the past decade, including 2024. Guterres also highlighted the adoption of the Pact for the Future on September 22, 2024, as a critical step forward. Finalized during the Summit of the Future after 9 months of negotiations, the agreement includes provisions for a sustainable digital future and was approved without a vote.
This is climate breakdown in real time. In 2025, countries must put the world on a safer path by dramatically slashing emissions.
This concludes our top stories for this hour. Now let's go to Rana for a detailed review of the most significant stories of 2024. From major global developments to key events shaping the Middle East, we will explore the moments that left a lasting impact on the year.
Thank you very much, Salma. In 2024, the United States experienced a year of intense political battles, historic moments, and shifting dynamics. From dramatic twists in the presidential race to ongoing struggles with economic and social challenges. This year played a pivotal role in shaping America's future. Join us as we recap the key events and developments that defined the U.S. in 2024.
Because the fact is, make America great again.
Have Joe Biden.
Taken back.
The 2024 U.S. presidential election was a defining chapter in American politics, marked by fierce competition and unexpected turns. As the campaign evolved, dramatic debates, political endorsements, and personal challenges shaped the path to a high-stakes election day, ultimately leading to Trump's victory. Tonight, we look back at the key moments and twists that made this election one for the history books.
The 2024 U.S. presidential election marked a defining moment in American political history, characterized by fierce competition and dramatic developments. Incumbent Democratic President Joe Biden began the year seeking re-election, facing a determined challenge from former Republican President Donald Trump, who aimed to stage a political comeback. The campaign gained momentum on June 27th with the first presidential debate, where Biden and Trump clashed over critical issues, including immigration, the economy, inflation, and foreign policy. However, Biden's performance drew widespread criticism, with observers noting incoherent responses and frequent lapses in focus. In a stunning political twist, Biden announced his withdrawal from the race on July 21st, endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris as his successor. By August 5th, Harris consolidated her position as the Democratic frontrunner, presenting a platform centered on unity, economic equality, and healthcare reform. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign highlighted economic growth, tax cuts, and stronger border security, fueling his resurgence among Republican voters.
It is time for us to come together as one united people.
The second presidential debate, held on September 10th, saw Harris and Trump engaged in a heated exchange. Harris delivered a strong performance, critiquing Trump's policies and leadership, while Trump countered with sharp attacks on the Biden administration's record. The debate offered voters a stark contrast between the candidates' visions on pivotal issues such as the economy, healthcare, and immigration. Both campaigns faced unique challenges as the race intensified. Harris grappled with distancing herself from the controversies of the Biden administration, while Trump navigated a series of assassination attempts. On July 13th, a gunman shot Trump in the ear during a rally in Pennsylvania. Subsequent attempts were thwarted in Florida on September 15th and in California on October 12th, underscoring the volatile nature of the campaign. Undeterred, both candidates pushed forward with relentless campaigning, culminating in a high-stakes election day on November 5th.
The 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Trump emerged victorious, securing 312 electoral votes to Harris's 226, declaring his win. An unprecedented and powerful mandate, Trump celebrated his remarkable return to the presidency. In her concession speech, Harris emphasized unity, respect for the democratic process, and a commitment to moving the nation forward despite the outcome.
Create an endorsement one way or another.
The 2024 election will be remembered not only for its dramatic twists, but also for its enduring impact on America's political landscape.
Joe Biden, you're fired!
For further analysis on the 2024 U.S. presidential election, we're joined from Washington by national security expert Mr. John Rossomando. Welcome to Q News, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Sir, how did Biden's withdrawal impact the dynamics of the 2024 presidential race?
Well, Biden's withdrawal from the race left the Democrats scrambling to find a candidate, and under U.S. campaign finance law, only Vice President Kamala Harris would have been entitled to have all the money that Biden raised as for her campaign. And ultimately, she proved to be an inferior candidate who could not hold up against President Trump's charisma and his vision for America.
Sir, so do you see here that from your own narrative that I understand that Trump is charismatic enough to win this election that, of course, twisted suddenly in the United States?
Well, I would say that if you look at the demographics across the board, President Trump increased his share of the vote among blacks, among Hispanics, even in urban areas that he lost, like in New York City, the number of votes that he received went up. So I think that President Trump has proven that he's capable and he's able to learn from his mistakes.
Okay, sir, what were the key factors behind Trump's successful comeback to the presidency, sir?
Well, I think the key was Donald Trump himself. He showed that he could evolve as a president, as a leader, based on acknowledging the mistakes he made in the past by putting people who did not agree with him into his administration. Now he's putting people who agree. And also, he put a vision for America of making America a strong nation that looks after its interests instead of the interests of the World Economic Forum or other nations, and focused on what America wants.
Sir, how did Kamala Harris's campaign resonate with voters despite her eventual loss?
Well, it didn't resonate.
Why didn't it resonate, sir?
Well, it didn't resonate because Kamala Harris can't speak to save her life. She made a lot of really dumb comments that alienated a lot of voters. She appeared to be defending the indefensible, the Biden record on inflation, the Biden record on foreign policy, and Americans decided to say, hey, when President Trump was president, it was a better country.
Sir, what role did the assassination attempts on Trump play in shaping public opinion? And of course, it shaped a lot.
Well, I would say that it showed that President Trump was a strong leader. Americans like strength. Americans do not like weakness or failure, and it shaped in people's minds that President Trump deserved another chance.
Sir, how did economic issues influence voter preferences during the 2024 election, sir?
Well, if you look at inflation, the average cost of basic goods in America doubled under Biden's administration compared to where there had been, say, in 2019 before the pandemic. And Americans thought, we're going to go back to what President Trump gave us with his leadership.
Okay, what, sir, can we learn from the debates about the contrasting visions of Harris and Trump?
I think that you can look at the fact that the Democrats wanted to divide and conquer America. They were more interested in arguing over gay rights, arguing over giving illegal migrants the ability to stay in America. And President Trump was talking about rebuilding the economy, rebuilding America's place in the world. And
so,
that resonated.
Didn't you read that the Democrats had their own perspective and point of view and not fighting this points that you were discussing now?
Well, I'm just saying that the American people agreed with President Trump's vision. That's why he won the popular vote. That's why his percentage of the vote increased. And you have analysts on the Democrat side admitting now that their party is lost.
Okay. So how might Trump's victory affect America's domestic and foreign policies moving forward?
I think that in terms of America's domestic policy, I think President Trump will pursue further tax cuts. He'll pursue a policy to rein in inflation, rein in spending. And on a foreign policy, I think you'll see what my colleague Sebastian Gorka who says is selective power. President Trump will use American power to bring peace to the world. I think that's what you'll see.
Peace to the entire region, sir?
I think that he will do everything that he can to bring everybody to the table, to bring about a peaceful region and a peaceful world.
Okay. So what are the long-term implications of this election for the Democratic and Republican parties?
I think that the long-term implication for the Republicans is that the old Northeast establishment, dominated by the Bush family and by those who we used to call country club Republicans, is over. Trump's populism is the future of the Republican Party, and the Democrats veer into democratic socialism is a dead end, and they're going to have to figure out how to recover.
Sir, with all optimism, of course, as U.S.-elect Donald Trump, of course, on the 20th of January is his inauguration. We wish, of course, the United States best of luck. That was the national security expert, Mr. John Rossomando. Thank you very much for your valuable and informative insights, sir. As 2024 marked a pivotal year for U.S.-EU relations, shaped by political transitions, joint military support for Ukraine, strengthened energy ties, and evolving trade and security dynamics, all reflecting a complex yet enduring transatlantic partnership. One of 2024's most pivotal global dynamics is evolving relationships between the United States and China. From diplomatic overtures to rising tensions, this complex and often volatile bond has shaped economic and geopolitical landscapes worldwide. We will now go through the defining moments of the year that have redefined this critical relationship and set the stage for what lies ahead with Hani Saif.
The relationship between the USA and China, the two largest global powers, is a complex and often volatile bond that continues to evolve, reshaping dynamics not only between them but also globally. Despite initial optimism following a stabilizing summit in November 2023, the US-China relationship has shown signs of fragility in 2024. The year began with cautious optimism following the November 2023 San Francisco summit, where Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden reaffirmed their commitment to dialogue and the management of their complex relationship. In April, the two leaders held a phone call, followed by a face-to-face meeting at the APEC Leaders Summit in Lima, underscoring their commitment to maintaining communication despite ongoing tensions. Later that month, high-level U.S. officials, including Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, visited China. These diplomatic efforts focused on stabilizing trade relations and easing economic tensions. Despite these diplomatic efforts, the relationship began to strain as the U.S. escalated its economic measures. An increasing number of Chinese companies were added to the U.S. Bureau of Industry and Securities entity list, restricting their access to critical U.S. technologies. Simultaneously, the U.S. imposed new investment restrictions on China's high-tech sectors, further exacerbating tensions. In Washington, Congress has been actively drafting legislation to counter China's influence, including measures to reconsider China's permanent normal trade relations status. In May, the U.S. State Department issued a travel warning for China, a rare step highlighting the growing unease in their relationship. Although the warning was lifted in November, underlying tensions persisted. Adding a new layer of uncertainty, Donald Trump's re-election in 2024 has further complicated U.S.-China relations. His campaign pledged to impose sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports has heightened fears of deeper economic disruptions. The path forward remains uncertain. Will diplomatic efforts succeed, or will geopolitical and economic tensions escalate into a deeper crisis? The US-China relationship depends on a delicate balance of competition and cooperation, with the stakes in 2025 higher than ever.
And for further analysis on the evolving relationship between the United States and China, we're joined from California by retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Raymond Powell. Welcome to Q News, sir, on this very special day of our special coverage. Sir, how would you evaluate the outcomes of November 2023 summit between Biden and Xi?
Well, I think they were well-intentioned. I think that the problem that they faced in the long term was the structural one, which is that in the end, the U.S. and China are embarked on very different pathways, and they just don't converge in the ways that you would want them to. So, and this goes sort of across the board, from geopolitical kinds of objectives to trade to economics to human rights. So, I mean, I think that they were temporarily stabilizing, but I think the long-term trajectory is the problem.
Sir, of course, you listened to Donald Trump's, statements when he said that he is going to be applying 25% tariffs on any trade, specifically in China. How do you read this, sir?
Well, I think this is a going-in position. We know from the past and from his own statements that Donald Trump likes to sort of go in high and hard, as it were, on trade deals. He wants to sort of set out very ambitious objectives and then negotiate down from there. So I think this is him sort of laying out a marker, letting Xi Jinping and China know that this is, he intends to drive a hard bargain. And I think this is kind of typical of what we've seen of Donald Trump in the past.
Sir, do you think that the diplomatic visits by U.S. officials question will be any impact, or will have any impact on the relations between China and the United States?
Well, I think that, visits by senior officials tend to have fairly limited impact, really, because ultimately the decision maker in Beijing is Xi Jinping himself. Understanding Donald Trump and his statements, I think, goes to understanding that he himself views himself as a destabilizer. In other words, he sees things oftentimes as being stable in the wrong place, and so he wants to temporarily destabilize things so that he can get them to the place that he prefers. So stability isn't necessarily going to be his going-in objective.
Okay, you mean, sir, in his style of negotiation as a businessman, how could Congress's potential reconsideration of China's trade status reshape U.S.-China's economic relations, sir?
Well, certainly if Congress were to pass legislation that withdraws China's most favored nation trading status, that would be very significant as far as not just U.S.-China trade, but sort of the world system that has become very accustomed to most favored nation status for China over the last quarter century. So that would be a very disruptive event, which is not to say that it shouldn't happen, because China is probably the world's foremost cheater, if you will, on trade. It systematically subsidizes its own industries in contravention of a lot of the principles of free trade, and steals intellectual property and those kinds of things. So it would be a huge deal. I'm not sure that it'll happen, but it also strengthens Donald Trump's hand. If they do start to move ahead on that, it strengthens his hand, because he can just go to Xi Jinping and he can say, look, you're going to have to kind of come around on this, because I've got this Congress that's threatening to do this thing. And, it basically gives him an extra negotiating chip.
Sir, how do you foresee the implications of Trump's return to power for the future of the United States-China diplomatic ties?
Well, so Donald Trump, in many ways, similarly to Xi Jinping, pursues a very personalized kind of diplomacy. So when he himself enters the fray, really it matters very much what he himself wants. And so oftentimes that can sort of bypass a lot of the diplomatic structure that we set up that through the State Department and ambassadors and military and all these things that we set up bureaucratically to manage relations. Oftentimes he can just end run all of that because he likes to get in there and make his own deals. However, at the times that he's not sort of focused on that, he tends to he's already nominated a lot of very hawkish people on China, and again, across the board, from the Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio to his defense secretary, his national security advisor. They have lots of very hawkish statements about China and have a history of being skeptical of China on the international stage. So we might look to them and see them put in place a lot of policies that would be kind of tough on China.
Is this for the sake of the United States, sir? Or in sake of the United States?
Well, yeah, I think for the United States, what we would see is, again, these policies come into effect, and then probably, looking at Donald Trump coming in to try to, put together deals that, benefit the United States. And I think that that's what we saw in Trump's first term. So we'll see. Obviously, time will tell if we'll see the similar kind of thing in the second term. It'll be a different Trump administration, but we've seen his predilections already.
So you read it, sir, as a tactic?
I think that's what the kinds of things that Donald Trump says are frequently very tactical and intended to strengthen his hand in negotiations.
Okay, sir, how significant was the United States travel warning for China in illustrating the state of bilateral trust?
Look, I think the travel warning is a real one. I mean, there are actual human beings who get trapped in China and accused of crimes and can't get out. And so, the travel warning comes down first and foremost as a warning. It's not just a diplomatic tool. It's actually trying to protect Americans who might think going through China is safe, but there are examples now of people who are stuck there and can't get out. And that, not only is that bad for those people, it's also bad for the United States and the U.S.-China relationship because it complicates negotiations on other things. The U.S. has to try to get those people back, and to some degree, they are being used as negotiating chips by China.
Sir, to what extent is the United States focused on economic competition with China affecting broader geopolitical stability?
Well, I mean, I think that there is, at least domestically, there is a lot of focus on China's unfair trade practices, and to the extent to which a lot of Americans believe they disadvantage themselves, they disadvantage Americans. So, and I think that Donald Trump focuses very much on this himself. So I think that's a real concern of sort of ordinary Americans. I'd say there's sort of official Washington, which is very concerned about China's geopolitical trends, which are becoming extremely aggressive and extremely confrontational across the globe. You look at sort of across the Taiwan Strait and in the South China Sea and places like this, where we are seeing a very muscular China trying to impose its will on its neighbors, many of whom the U.S. has treaty alliances and very close relationships with.
Okay, do you foresee cooperation between the United States and China on global issues like climate change and cybersecurity despite the increasing tensions, sir?
I think both of those issues are very problematic for U.S.-China relations. First of all, on climate change, first the Trump administration is unlikely to prioritize climate change. It did not campaign on having a strong stance on climate change, and I think it's very skeptical that China uses climate change in negotiations as a way to sort of, again, disadvantage the United States, or sort of offer things that it doesn't intend to follow up on. I think with cybersecurity, that's the problem there is we're looking at a massive hack of U.S. telecoms that is just coming out in the Salt Typhoon hack that is going to dominate the U.S. news for a little while. So cooperation with China on cybersecurity has to begin with figuring out exactly to what extent is China the problem on cybersecurity rather than the solution.
Sir, are you optimistic that there will be a meeting point between both countries?
I think there will be meetings, but I think, again, the problem is that the imperatives of both countries are, once again, moving in very different directions.
Yes.
China is what we often will call a revisionist state, which means that it wants to revise the world system that has sort of prevailed since the end of World War II, believing that now that China is strong, it deserves a much stronger space in that system, and that means pulling away from a lot of the structures that are there now. And so, for example, in the South China Sea, there's international law that says that certain international standards apply, but China believes that they shouldn't apply in the South China Sea because that is rightfully Chinese owned. And so that brings us to loggerheads. And that's just one example amongst scores of examples of places where China just wants to move in a very different direction than the U.S. and the West.
Okay, sir, then we're going to be waiting and witnessing what's going to take place. That was the retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Raymond Powell. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights. The United States' role in the Russia-Ukraine conflict has undergone dramatic shifts in 2024, from lifting restrictions on weapons used to intensifying military support. As Donald Trump's return to power nears, uncertainty surrounds America's future strategy, raising questions about its long-standing support for Ukraine and the broader implications for global security. Tonight, we unpack the key developments and their potential consequences.
The United States has shifted its approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, moving from historic security agreements and lifting weapons restrictions to intensified military actions. With President-elect Donald Trump's return to power looming, the future of U.S. support for Ukraine remains uncertain. At Italy's G7 summit in June 2024, the U.S.-Ukraine security agreement was signed to enhance Ukraine's defense capabilities, reforms, and Euro-Atlantic integration. The 10-year pact also aims to strengthen Ukraine's economy and sovereignty while ensuring lasting security in coordination with global partners. In November 2024, the Biden administration lifted restrictions that had prevented Ukraine from using U.S.-supplied weapons to strike deep into Russia, signifying a major policy shift. The decision followed months of pressure from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Western allies urging greater latitude in Ukraine's military operations. 2 days later, Russia reported that Ukrainian forces had launched US-made ATACMS missiles in a Russian border region, marking a significant escalation. This development occurred amid rising tensions following Russia's deployment of North Korean troops. For the first time, the US stated that it has evidence of North Korean forces in Russia. This came as the White House announced that North Korean troops currently training in Russia would be considered legitimate military targets if they engaged in combat in Ukraine. Subsequently, Russia launched an attack on Ukraine using its newly developed Oreshnik ballistic missile, as threatened by President Vladimir Putin. His remarks followed a large-scale Russian strike on Ukraine's power grid, which he described as retaliation for ongoing Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory using US-supplied ATACMS missiles. Since the onset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the U.S. Congress has approved 5 laws providing ongoing aid to Ukraine, with the most recent in April 2024, totaling approximately $175 billion. However, the actual amount could be significantly higher when factoring in the cost of replacing weapons and ammunition sent to Kiev. During his electoral campaign, Trump repeatedly vowed to end the nearly 3-year conflict within 24 hours of his inauguration on January 20th of 2025, if not sooner. However, he has yet to disclose how he plans to achieve this. Donald Trump's return to power introduces uncertainty to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. His controversial foreign policies, skepticism towards NATO, and complex ties with Russian President Putin raise questions about whether he will continue military aid or push for a negotiated settlement that could affect Ukraine's sovereignty. Prolonged conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war typically end in one of 3 ways: a decisive victory, a surrender, or a ceasefire brokered by international powers. Future developments will largely depend on U.S. decisions, including military support and potential policy shifts under Trump that could significantly influence the conflict's trajectory.
For further analysis on the United States' relation to the Russia-Ukraine conflicts, we're joined from Washington by the foreign affairs expert Adrian Kalamel. Welcome to Qnews, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Qnews. How has the 2024 U.S.-Ukraine security agreement reshaped the geopolitical dynamics of the conflict, sir?
Thank you for having me. Great
question.
It's
my utmost pleasure, sir.
Thank you. As far as the geopolitical ramifications, what the United States is finally supplying the Ukrainians, if you look at the first 3 years or 2.5 years of the war, it's been a drip, drip, drip of slowly supplying defensive munitions, defensive weaponry to stave off a full Russian invasion. It's just recently that we're seeing the United States start to say, well, you know what, maybe we should start looking at some offensive packages to help the Ukraine, particularly because we have to remember Russia has been using offensive weapons during the entire campaign to invade Ukraine and to take it over. And I think we can't lose sight of that. So when the U.S. introduces offensive weapons, Vladimir Putin is always going to cry foul. He's cried foul when they introduced new airplanes, any type of new system that gets introduced into the conflict that weakens his hand, and he is dealing with a firepower and a manpower issue right now with the North Korean troops. He's going to start raising a stink about it, and that's what he's doing right now.
Okay, sir, you mentioned defense weaponry, full Russian invasion on Ukraine. And most importantly, the offensive package to help Ukraine. Could you please elaborate more about the offensive package to help Ukraine in this context?
Well, with the offensive package, I think what most people, when they associate an offensive package, and this has been talked about for years, for a couple of years now, about Ukrainian counteroffensives, going on a counteroffensive to take territory held by the Russians that's been taken. The problem with this is the offensive firepower that they've been given has not been enough. Additionally, the Russians have prepped the battlefield. They've been sitting in areas that they controlled for years now. We can go back to past conflicts that the Ukrainians apparently want to take. So it's very difficult to launch a counteroffensive. And it doesn't really matter how much firepower you have if the Russians have completely entrenched themselves, dug themselves in. The offensive power tells to Putin that we're serious, we're taking this seriously, and that we know you have a firepower issue, which has never been a problem with Russia post-Soviet Union. They are now falling into that problem because of the conflict in Ukraine, and you look at the conflict in Syria from 2015 to 2018, Russia's stretched. Putin is stretched. It's more of a messaging than an actual, I would say, tactical, strategic game changer.
Got you, sir. What are the implications of lifting restrictions on the United States supplied weapons for Ukraine's military strategy and international law, sir?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yes, of course, sir. What are the implications of lifting sanctions and restrictions, lifting restrictions on the United States supplied weapons for Ukraine's military strategy and international law?
Personally, I don't think there should be restrictions. Russia has several times, they annexed Crimea, they baloney sliced the most industrial part of Ukraine, and now they wanted to take the entire country with an assault on Kiev. That was the goal. The United States wanted to get Zelensky out of the country. They didn't want him to fight. So I think what people need to understand is that in the world, in the globe right now, there are three main players: Russia, Beijing, and Tehran. And they are working against the other countries, the civilized countries in the world. And Ukraine is central to this fight in pushing back Russia, in pushing back their ambitions. Because if it affects Russia, then it affects the Islamic Republic, and it also affects China as well.
That was the foreign affairs expert, Adrian Calamel. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights, and thank you very much for joining us on this very special day. US-NATO relations in 2024 marked a pivotal year for the alliance, which celebrated its 75th anniversary amid growing global challenges. With modernization efforts underway and questions about future US leadership, the partnership navigated evolving security threats, political shifts, and debates over defense priorities. Tonight, we examine the key developments shaping NATO's trajectory and their global implications.
The United States is a cornerstone of NATO, providing 60% of its budget and a powerful military presence. This vital partnership bolsters transatlantic security, with the US dedicated to maintaining NATO's strength in tackling global challenges. Washington, D.C. hosted the 2024 NATO Summit from July 9th till the 11th, marking the alliance's 75th anniversary, where leaders from all 32 member states convened to reaffirm NATO's strength, unity, and commitment to transatlantic security. On December 4th of 2024, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken noted that NATO has undergone significant modernization, evolving from its 2021 strategic concept to address contemporary security challenges like cyber threats, climate change, and disruptive technologies. This transformation reflects a concerted effort to adopt NATO's mission to an increasingly complex security landscape. The United States has emphasized investments in its defense industrial base, strengthening its capabilities. Such measures ensure NATO's long-term preparedness and the broader transatlantic community's security. Washington contributes an estimated 60% of the alliance's budget and provides nearly 505,000 of its troops, while the other NATO member states contribute 1.4 million soldiers, and military budget that does not exceed $400 billion. There are concerns of the next Trump administration leading NATO to shift focus to the Indo-Pacific, fearing a military role there similar to the US presence in Europe. That comes as Beijing views the White House's outreach to Japan and South Korea as part of US containment efforts. These are not the only concerns. Donald Trump's strategies could reshape relations with NATO, posing new security challenges. During Trump's first term, he showed reluctance towards NATO and criticized European defense spending, which are issues he might raise again. In August 2024, Trump stated that NATO members should spend at least 3% of their GDP on defense instead of the current 2% guideline. Trump is also expected to take steps to reduce U.S. commitments to NATO, potentially undermining the effectiveness of the alliance established to protect Europe from external threats. NATO announced that Secretary General Mark Rutte met with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump in Florida on November 22nd of 2024. The meeting, held in Palm Beach, focused on a range of global security issues facing the alliance. The NATO statement also mentioned that Rutte and his team met with Congressman Mike Waltz, whom Trump selected as his national security advisor. That comes as Donald Trump has appointed Matthew Whitaker, who served as acting Attorney General during his first term as the U.S. ambassador to NATO. Concerns over the future of NATO under a potential Trump administration include a shift towards the Indo-Pacific and a reduction in U.S. commitments. Trump's past criticism of NATO and defense spending could reshape the alliance's focus and effectiveness.
As we wrap up the first hour of our 2024 recap, stay tuned for the next segment, where we shift focus to the ongoing developments in Lebanon. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates in Qnews.